Okay guys, welcome to another training here at Cellular Repair School. This is William Agnew, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a iPod 5th generation repair. We're going to be doing a full assembly repair. So what we have here is our iPod 5th generation, touch generation. You can always, again, look on the back if you're not sure what type of device you have. You can always look on the back, find the model number, which this one is model A1509. All right, so if you're not sure, and then all you got to do is throw that in Google really fast, and it'll tell you exactly which model you have. And this again is the iPod 5th generation iPod Touch. So what we're going to be doing is replacing it. So what you see here is the replacement. We actually have the replacement here. This is the full assembly. All right, and this full assembly already comes with the mid frame on it, the plastic mid frame. So what we don't have to do is when we take this mid frame off, we don't have to reuse it. We don't have to move it over here because we actually have the assembly with the frame already on it. Now you can purchase this this assembly without the frame, and when you move or remove this frame, you can use the frame from the old device and put it on the new device. So it really depends on what you want. These are a little more expensive. You just pay a little bit more, but if you want to sacrifice time, then get this without the mid frame and just move it. If you don't want to sacrifice time, then you can go ahead and buy these with the mid frame already on them. So it's really up to you as to how you want to do it going forward. But the first thing we're going to do is what we always do. We're going to do our pre-check on our device. So we just want to check our device. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look. So what you can see here on this particular device, you can see the screen is fine. The digitizer works well. There's nothing wrong with the digitizer. It's the LCD that is damaged. All right, so up here, you have this little ink blot where it bled, and you can also see where the screen is doing the matrix pretty much. So what we're going to do is just make sure that everything else is working properly, so we can see our screens working properly. We want to test our volume, right? So if we do a unlock, not sure what the password is on this, so can't do full testing. So just always make sure you know what your passwords are for your customers if you want to do a full full test. But what we can test is we can always test the things that can be tested. So we can test the home button. Home button's working fine. We can test the sleep button, home button. Home button's working fine. Digitizer's working fine. So everything that we can test without having the unlock. So we'll just go ahead and go forward, but this is what we're going to be replacing today on the iPod Touch 5th Gen phone. So the first thing we want to do, guys, is we want to, like we always do, we want to turn everything off. So we're going to go ahead and hold down our power button and slide the unit completely off, right? And you want to do that, and the reason why you want to do that is you want to make sure you don't have any voltage or current surges or voltage spikes, current surges that will destroy your circuitry, give you, blow your fuses, cause your backlights to go out, things like that. So my advice is just to always shut things down, always turn things off before you get started. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and shut that down and move to the next step. All right, guys, welcome back. So what we're going to be doing first is we're going to be removing the assembly. Okay, so we're going to be taking the assembly out, so we have to remove that. Now, what you guys have always learned and what you should already know is that there are three things that hold devices together. All right, you have tabs, you have screws, and you have adhesive. Now, in this case, this top layer or the top part of this assembly is adhesive. So anytime we're going to remove adhesive, you guys know what we have to use. We have to use a little bit of heat. And we use what we refer to as our low-level heat. Our low-level heat we're going to apply to the outer edges of the device. And if you look through it, you can really see where the contact points are made. It's at the top mainly and the bottom, and then you have very thin sides, right? So what you want to primarily focus on is your top and your bottom. And when we start to remove, we're going to start to remove our assembly from the bottom and get separation. So you have a couple of tools you can use. We can use our, for you novices, for you guys who aren't really experienced, and even for you guys who are, my number one suggestion is always use a plastic tool. All right, for you guys who are a little more little more experienced. A very flat blade, even though it's metal, you can use. You just have to be very careful because again, what we don't want to do is we don't want to damage the outer casing, right? And we could very easily do that with metal. So we just want to be careful, and we don't want to short anything out. So we want to be very careful if we use metal. I always like to get things started with metal, and then I will pick up because I'm, again, I'm a little more experienced, and I'm a little more, cautious. So I'll start with metal just to get in and get it started, and then what I'll do is I'll move over to plastic once I get things open because I don't want to run the risk of touching my metal on the inside and shorting things out. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our rework station, and our low level heat, like I've always told you guys, is about 150, I'd say about 150 degrees Celsius. So you want to set your rework station to 150 degrees Celsius, okay? And then once you get there, you're just going to take your heat in about 30 seconds. For about 30 seconds, you're just going to heat it up at about an inch, maybe an inch and a half away from your device. So we're going to keep it moving, right? And we're going to heat her up. So we got to be careful with this because we don't want to destroy anything, right? And heat is very destructive, and it can destroy things very, very fast. Before we even know it, we could melt ribbon cables, damage LCDs, cameras, home buttons, all of that stuff. So we just want to kind of keep it moving, okay? This is low level heat, so it's really not going to hurt your hand or anything. And again, low level heat's around 150 degrees Celsius. We're just warming up that adhesive. And what warming that adhesive up does is it just releases it, all right? It deactivates it, all right? Which is what we need because it's gonna make it easier for this, this assembly to come out, all right? And we're gonna do this for, again, about 30 seconds. Just make her nice and warm. Heat her up nice and warm. All right, and we're gonna start at the bottom, so I'm gonna focus on the bottom right here a little bit, put a little bit more emphasis on the bottom. All right, and then we should be good. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna take my flat blade and I'm gonna go right in at the bottom, right here. And again, I'm gonna be very careful. I'm gonna get right in that corner. I'm gonna actually push down on the glass a little bit just to be sure I'm not damaging the casing. And then I'm gonna work that glass out. I'm gonna start to work that glass out. So I got a little bit of separation. Zoom in so you guys can see this really good. Got a little bit of separation right there. So you guys can see that. All right, and then what we're gonna do is just keep working that. All right, so again, that's what I like to do. I like to get a little separation. And then what I'll do is I'll transfer over to some plastic, and that's just to keep me from damaging the frame. Or the casing, excuse me. Because then what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start sliding all the way around, as you guys can see. Again, I'm just gonna work my way all the way around. So it's a couple of things you guys will be able to see. So where I am right now, I'm going to show you guys right here. There's a couple of things you'll be able to see. I'm actually under the mid frame. So you can do this one of two ways. I like to get started under the mid frame just so I'm making sure I'm missing everything in regards to the back casing, so I'm not damaging anything. But once I get that bottom up, you start to see a separation right here in the glass and the mid frame. Okay. Now I'll tell you, the glass is held in via adhesive. The mid frame is held in via tabs, okay? So what you can do is you can start with the mid frame first, or you can start with the, you can start with the glass first, right? And separate the glass first, and then release the mid frames. So what I wanna do is, I'm gonna go here, take my flat blade. Okay, so I'm gonna take my flat blade, and I'm gonna get right in between my glass and my mid frame. And what I'm gonna start to do now is just release my glass first. So as you can see, I have my plastic under my mid frame, okay? But I have my metal under my glass. So now what I'm doing is just separating the glass, which is all adhesive. Now you guys can actually hear the adhesive release as I come around. And you can see as I work it, what I'm doing is releasing the adhesive from the mid frame. All right. And now that I don't want to pull it all the way back yet. I'm not going to pull it all the way back. I'm just going to kind of leave it right there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my plastic pick and I'm going to release the tabs that are holding in my mid frame. So I'm going to go ahead and release that too. And if you get over here on the side, you'll see you just kind of get underneath. So you want to be careful. If you're using this mid frame again, guys, then you just want to be careful not to damage it too much. If you already have a mid frame on the unit that you're replacing with the unit you're replacing, or the assembly that you're replacing, you don't have to be as careful not to damage it. And if you do damage it by chance, you can always replace the mid frames. All right, so we just got to get these tabs released. These tabs are kind of funky the way they just kind of push out. So what you'll notice is they have a little lip that comes out towards the casing this way. So if you push in, you should be able to release the tabs pretty easily. Just like that. You guys can see, so we have that whole side released. And then what we're going to do is we're going to flip around on this side. Let me back up so you guys can see a little bit better, so not so close. What we're going to do is flip around on this side, and we're going to release the remaining tabs on this side. So you see we start right here at the bottom. And we're going to get under those tabs, kind of push in. Again, it's release. And I like to call it gentle force. You want to use gentle force. I'm having a little bit of trouble with this last one. And again, we don't have to be so careful. I actually even broke that one. So we don't have to be so careful with these tabs because we're not reusing this. We actually are going to replace it, okay? So as you notice, I did break that one. So, but if you don't want to, if you want to reuse this, right, which you can, you totally can, you want to be a little bit more careful not to break it so that you can take it off and reuse it again, all right? And that all depends on whether you're going to be using it on this or replacing it on this or not. Like I said, we already have, as you notice, if you look at that, we already have tabs in the same place, right? So we don't need to use this one. We already have tabs on the replacement that we're going to be using. So we're all good. So we're just going to fold that back now, all right? So what you can do is fold that back, lay that down. That's the first step. So again, just to review a little bit, what we've done is we basically removed the assembly, right, which is the LCD and the digitizer and the home button and your camera up here and your mid frame. So all of that is right here on this side. We basically released that. What we did is we got started. We used our flat blade, went in, we got deep, which is what I like to do. We go deep, but we actually go under the mid frame. We lift out the mid frame from the bottom. Once we get the mid frame out, we then use our plastic tool to kind of hold under our mid frame, and then we take our flat blade and we get under the glass and we start to separate the glass from the mid frame, Once we get the glass up, then we can go back and we can remove the mid frame, and then we fold the whole entire assembly back, and then we'll move on to the next step. All right, guys, so the next thing we're gonna do is remove our EMI shield. As you can see, this shield runs from all the way from the top all the way to the bottom. So it's a pretty big EMI shield. It has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 screws that we have to remove in order to get this entire EMI shield out. So we're gonna go ahead and do that now. We're gonna start removing screws. So you can just start anywhere. You can start at the top, bottom. All the screws are basically the same size. They are Phillips screws. Phillips driver screws, so we're going to go ahead and remove those. Again, you guys should know, anytime you're removing screws, make sure you're removing the right ones. Anytime you're removing screws, just be sure not to over torque the screws or to strip the screws. As you know, with iPod devices or Apple devices, their screws tend to be a little more fragile, a little smaller, very soft. So it's very easy to damage screws on Apple devices. So just be careful of that. You don't have to over torque it. And when I mean over torque it, I mean when you're tightening it back up or putting them back on with the screws, you don't have to put too much force on it because you will strip it or break it. All you have to do is just make sure it's tight. When it's tight, it's good. All right, so when it stops spinning, it's good. A lot of times with new students, a lot of times they'll just want to turn until it won't turn anymore, and you know that causes problems a lot of times. Having a little bit of problems with that screw, so we'll just bypass it, come back to it. Again, all of these screws are the same size, so you don't really have to worry about keeping them in too much of an order. Gotta come all the way around. Yeah. Now these screws at the bottom here, they are a little different. These two screws right here, so this screw right here is a little longer. So just be aware of that. And this has to go back in the right place. Alrighty. Yeah. So what we're going to do now, guys, is now that we have all of our screws out, what we're going to do now is go ahead and remove our EMI shielding. So it's got a couple of tabs on it, and again, it runs from top all the way to bottom. So once you get all your screws out, pretty much just lifts, kind of like that. Now, what you want to be is very careful, because on the back side of this, you actually have some ribbon cables, all right? So you want to be really careful not to break those ribbon cables. And it's actually right here. It's part of your home button. So your home button's right here. So what you want to do is you want to release this ribbon before you remove your EMI shield. And this is where a lot of people actually damage these and they have to replace them. So we don't want to damage this ribbon cable here. So we want to make sure we release it, and it's got an adhesive right here on the front side. So what we're going to do is we're basically just going to take a flat blade. We're going to get under that ribbon. So you guys can see, let me zoom in so you guys can see this a little bit closer. But many times this causes a problem because people go to take the EMI shield off and they rip this ribbon cable for the home button right off, and then they have to replace it. So what we're going to do is take our ribbon, and again, if you need to heat this up a little bit, you can. You want to be really careful not to slip. And again, it's just adhesive holding the ribbon of that home button in place. So we're just getting under there to release it so we can lift it right up. All right, and fold that back, and now what we can do, we can slide that ribbon through and our EMI shield comes right off. All right, really simple, really easy. Again, just be aware of that, because if you go to take the EMI shield off and you're in a hurry, you're gonna rip that home button ribbon right off right there, all right? And we'll move on to the next step. All right, guys, now that we have our EMI shield removed, we have everything folded back, and now what we've done is we've exposed our battery, so you guys can see the battery, the Li-ion battery. or a Li-ion battery takes up a lot of space, takes up actually half of the device. And then right above that, we have our logic board, okay? And you can see the logic board right here where everything is connected to. Just point out a few things we actually have right here. We actually have our front-facing camera or back-facing camera. That's actually our front-facing camera, excuse me. On this particular device, we don't have a back camera, just a front-facing camera. And then here we have our ribbon cable right here, our LCD ribbon cable. Here we have our digitizer ribbon cable. So what we're going to do is we're going to remove these 3 screws holding in our logic board. So that's going to be our next step. And we're going to remove our camera. So what we can do is we can go ahead and pop our camera right out. You just take our plastic tool, we get underneath that, pop our camera right back just like that. Okay, so our camera now is released. And then what we're also going to do is the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and remove these 3 screws. So we have a screw here, here, and here. All of these screws are holding in our logic board. So we're going to go ahead and remove those screws. So we'll do that now. One. 2. And 3. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my little plastic tool here. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you guys can see, get a little closer. And what we're going to do is take that plastic tool and we're going to go underneath this adhesive on this LCD ribbon cable and just lift it off the board. I'm going to do that very carefully though. We don't want to damage anything. This LCD is obviously going to be replaced, so it's not that big a deal. But again, we just want to take our time so we don't slip and damage anything. So there we go. So we got that released. Again, that's just adhesive, as you guys can see. So we pretty much have everything pretty much loose. Our digitizer ribbon cable is not held down. So then what we're going to do is we're just going to fold this back down. Back out so you guys can see. So we've basically taken out the 3 screws from our logic board. All right, and then we're going to flip this over. We're just going to flip that over, and what we should be able to do now is release our logic board from the back. So we're going to take our plastic tool, we're going to get in here, and again, we've released the camera, we've released all the ribbon cables, we've taken out the 3 screws to our logic board, and what we want to do is lift that logic board. And again, you want to be careful, guys, because you still have ribbon cables that are connected underneath. You still have connections underneath the board. And that's why we got to kind of do this, is so we can get to the other side of the board. And again, there's adhesive holding this stuff down. All right, so on the back side here, what you guys will notice is connectors. All right, so we have a few connectors. We have our volume flex connectors right here, right? It's the top one. If you can see, it's right there. So what we can do is go ahead and disconnect that. Okay, you just want to be extra careful not to show anything. So you can see this little connector right here. There's your volume flex connector, right? And then we also have the connector to our LCD, which is right here. So you want to get under there and release that one. So I want to take your time, be careful, guys, so you don't destroy anything. And then over here is our antenna connector, right there. So you want to be very careful right here also, because that antenna connector is very small, it can easily be damaged. So you just want to make sure you're careful over there. Or your Wi-Fi connector, excuse me. You don't need an antenna, it's a Wi-Fi connector. And then you have your volume flex right here, volume power flex right here. And then that's everything. And then our LCD. And then over here we have our digitizer flex on this side. So we're gonna get in there and lift that one up also. There we go, so we'll release that, all right? So again, just to restate what all of this is, right? Over here you had your digitizer flex. Right here in the middle we had our power and volume flex that we released in the middle. Over here on the left side we had our Wi-Fi that we released. And obviously right here we have our camera, and now the back side of our board is released from the whole assembly. So that's what it takes to actually get our assembly released, as you guys can see. So now our assembly is totally detached. All right. Now you wouldn't have to unhook necessarily anything else. And the only reason why we actually disconnected our power and our volume flex and our Wi-Fi is just so that we can get our board to lean a little bit more forward so we don't run the risk of breaking those. And then what we have to do, the challenge is going to be to get them back connected, all right? So what we can do is go ahead and discard this, keep this, resell this, whatever we want to do with this. So we're going to put this to the side. And then our next step, what we're going to do is we're going to add our new one back in. Now, what we have to be sure we do is we want to transfer the things that we need to transfer to our new device. So as you see here are our new assembly. So what you see here is the home button. Obviously, we're going to take this home button and we're going to move it over here. This is the black one, which I think is going to look pretty cool. Black on white looks pretty cool. So we're going to move that over. Again, we don't have to worry about the mid frame. So if you buy the ones that have the mid frame, then you're okay. If you buy the ones that don't, then obviously you have to take this mid frame and put it over here, which is pretty easy to do. And that's pretty much it, guys. Everything else is okay. We don't really have to transfer anything else. All right. So what we're going to do next is go ahead and insert our new assembly to our iPod 5th generation. All right, guys, before we put our new assembly in, what I want to do is point out just a few more things. So in case you guys want to do something different, go a little bit deeper, or you have a need to replace something a little different. We'll start from the top and kind of work our way down. So as you guys can see up here, you have your Wi-Fi. So if there's a problem with your Wi-Fi, you can just take that out, replace it, obviously. Right here, what you guys will see behind here, this little ribbon cable here, that's your power flex. So basically what you would do is just remove these little 3 screws right here. This is going to release your power button and your flex. Take your flex out. It also runs over to your volume. So your volume and your power flex are one and the same. They're all connected. So you basically remove that, replace it if you needed to. Working on down, you see the big ribbon cable behind right here. This big ribbon cable actually comes off your board over here. So it's taped on. And usually you see this a lot with iPods, the way it's taped. And usually what happens is they solder on the connectors to the board. So in order to change that out, you would have to then remove the tape and then desolder the ribbon cables from the board. So they do that with both the charging port, which you can see this big fat ribbon cable right here runs behind the battery. It comes all the way down to your charger port, basically. So it runs, that's how it's connected to. This is how your charging port is actually connected to the board. And they do that kind of on the cheap. This is an iPod Touch. And you see that a lot with iPod Touches. They skip. They leave out the SMD connectors a lot of times, and they just tape things in and solder things in, which is a little less expensive, but harder to repair for most people. So if you don't know how to do soldering, you're going to be a little, troubled by that if you're scared of soldering. So just know when you're doing a battery replacement, or you guys are taking battery replacements in or charging port replacements, the board is soldered. The ribbon cable is soldered to the board for both the battery and the charging port. So right here on this side, you actually see the battery, and you can see where the ribbon cable is actually coming off of the battery. You have tape right here, and then under that tape is where it's soldered on. And then you got your camera right here. Obviously, you can see your camera's also soldered on, which is, you can see right there. You can actually see all the little soldered contact pads right there for your camera. So it's not just as simple as popping your camera out. You actually have to be able to solder to do it correctly. And then down here also with the home buttons, kind of the same deal also. As you can see, your home button down here. We got to make sure we run that ribbon cable back through. But it looks like that home button is also soldered to the daughter board. So it's kind of a daughter kind of board down here where your charging port is. So iPod Touch is a little more little more challenging in regards to changing out some of these other things, just because the level of soldering you have to be able to do is kind of extensive, and you're soldering on ribbon cables, which is plastic, so you got to be careful you don't melt and burn your plastic. So with that being said, what we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead, and if you want to change the battery out, guys, basically all you do is lift the battery out, and then like I said, you would have to disconnect the battery here with the tape and then solder it back on. So those are some of your main, and obviously your charging port, right? You'd have to desolder that charging port from the ribbon cable and change it out too. And it's and mainly the reason why you'd have to do that is because it's all connected to the logic board. And logic boards we don't swap out, right? You can, but we don't. You know, if you're gonna buy a new logic board, you might as well buy a new device, is how I feel about it, but that's just me. So moving on, what we're gonna do is go ahead and reinstall. Those are some of the main repairs. We're gonna reinstall the broken assembly that we had here. So let's go ahead and continue. So the first thing we're going to do is go ahead and realign this, get it lined back up. So make sure we can put everything. All right, guys, now what we're doing now is we're connecting everything back to our board. So we have, again, our digitizer on the right side. We have our power flex and our volume flex right here, kind of in the middle. Zooming in a little bit so you guys can see, because this can be a little bit of a challenge, and I want you guys to know how to actually do this to get it back. And the problem is, if your hands are big, or you know, what happens is the power, especially the power flex and the volume flex, it's really close to the board, so it's almost impossible to get your hand in there to close it. So what I suggest, what I suggest you guys have is I suggest you guys use some plastic tweezers. And if you get close enough, what will happen is that power flex and that volume flex will line up properly. And then you just take your plastic tweezers and you line it up and you squeeze it until it clicks on. All right, that's what I advise you to do. You can use metal tweezers also, but you run the risk of shorting something out using metal tweezers. But because your finger's not going to be able to get in there, so you literally have to get that lined up and then squeeze it or clamp it down with something like tweezers. And I would suggest some plastic or some rubber tweezers to actually do that. Or you can do it with, again, metal tweezers, but you run the risk of shorting something out. All right, so we got it connected. Not to say that it won't come back off. It may, as we put the digitizer back on. There's a possibility it may come unhooked again. So if that's the case, we'd just have to start over and rehook it. But I think we should be able to get it back on there without losing it. And I think we lost it. And again, the idea, guys, so we lost it, but I'll show you guys exactly what I'm talking about. So what you want to do, and again, you might want to do this with plastic tweezers. You just want to line this up. And hopefully you guys can see that. So the only thing we have that's not connected, oh, we also have our Wi-Fi over here, which could cause us a little bit of issue too. So we almost have to do all of this with just the tools that we have. Right, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge, but we're going to start right here in the middle with our power and volume flex. So again, we just want to line that up. If we get it lined up, it actually sits right in front. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our tweezers, avoiding the connectors, but we just want to take our tweezers, try to line that up. Get it to sit in place. And what I'm gonna need to do is push that down a little bit so it'll sit right in place. Almost so it sits right in front of where it needs to be. And then once we get it there, the objective is to line it up and squeeze. Get it connected. All right, you just want to make sure that it is connected, which we do have it. Then I would squeeze again, because the last thing we want to do is put this back together and it's not functioning because we don't have it connected. So last but least, over here is our Wi-Fi, so we just want to make sure that one's connected also. So we just line that one up, which is even more of a challenge because our wire isn't really that long, and it is also soldered down to some ribbon. So we just want to make sure it's on there. Got to get it close. I'm gonna have to pull my board up a little bit. Kind of sit it on there. Once it gets on top, then we're just gonna clamp it down with our tweezers. The real hard part about this is lining it up properly. There we go, got it lined up. And we're just gonna squeeze till it pops on. And we got it. So if you push it back and forth like this, you can actually see that it's on and it's not flopping around. So now we have everything reconnected. So I'm just gonna go back through and make sure everything's connected properly. Kind of squeeze it with my tweezers. Again, I would suggest you guys use plastic tweezers for that. And there you have it. Everything on the inside is now put back properly so we can actually close it back down. All right, so what we're gonna do is lay this down, flip this back over, camera in. Now what we want to do is we want to line all of this back up with our holes. Make sure our ribbon cable's sitting properly. And you want to be gentle with this, guys, because what you don't want to do is you don't want anything to come disconnected from your board on the opposite side. But the closer we get this back to seated properly, the less risk we have of anything coming disconnected. All right, so there we go. We can hold it just like that, hold it in place. And then what I would suggest is go ahead and put those 3 screws in, because we're gonna test it before we close it up anyway. And if something's not working, then all we have to do at this point is just remove the 3 screws to go back in and reconnect. So it's not a big deal. We got 1 screw. All right, so we get our screws lined up. Again, all 3 of these screws are the same size. These logic board screws. So again, what we're doing is we're taking some of that adhesive from the old. And again, I'm not sure what this, it's a very conductive adhesive. It's a conductive adhesive is what it is. You can see it's shining. So it doesn't impede the conductivity of the contact, which is why it's used. And unfortunately, it all comes off on the old ribbon and doesn't stay where it's needed on the new one. So what we're doing is just migrating that over to the new one, so that it may serve us in the same capacity. So you can literally take your finger and scrape that off and then transfer it over to the new one. Again, what you guys need to do is what we did is we took some of the adhesive from here, which is a very conductive adhesive, right? And we transferred it from this old one to the new one. If you lost it, make sure you transfer it so this ribbon cable actually stays on the contact. It's important that this ribbon cable actually makes contact with the board, okay? So you need this adhesive. We actually added a little bit more regular adhesive too, just to ensure that that doesn't come up and the contact stays contact. But we didn't put the regular adhesive on the contact. We kind of put it in places where there wasn't a contact to the board. So you guys will see exactly what I'm talking about when you open that up. All right, so now we got everything in place. So what we're going to do now is we can take our camera and we can place our camera in place, our front facing camera. So we can go ahead and put that in place. And if we want, we can actually take the little sticker that we got that came on it, and we can put that on top of it so it stays in place. It doesn't pop around on us. So let's kind of get that in there and then tape it. There we go. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to put our shield back on. And our shield is going to help hold everything in place also to make sure everything's making contact properly and things don't come back loose. Okay, so what we're going to do is go ahead and put our shield back on. Down here at the bottom, we're going to make sure our home button runs through the hole. Flip that over, put it back on the right side. So our home button runs through the hole, and then we have the adhesive left, so we're going to make sure that's back in the right place. And we can line that up with the little holes. Make sure we put that right back where it needs to be. Okay. And then we're going to set our EMI shield back in its proper place. And then the next thing we're going to do, make sure everything is nice and flat. And the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and add our screws back to our EMI shield. One screw at a time. So as you can see, guys, really not a difficult repair by any means. Can be a little challenging just based on how things are laid out, especially putting the connectors back on the logic boards. And hopefully none of the connectors came disconnected. So what we're going to do before we actually close this completely up is we're going to test it before we close it completely up. Actually, we could test right now before we put all the screws in, but we'll just go ahead and put the screws in and gamble a little bit on. So yeah, we could test right now, actually, because we have everything connected and contacting. But I'm just going to go ahead and put all of the screws back in anyway before we test. But I would suggest, if you guys are working on customers' units, go ahead and test it at this point. And that way, if you have a problem, then you can just back out really quickly. Put the screw in prematurely. All right, guys, so one of the last things we need to do is we need to get our home button from our old device. So all we need to do is take our old assembly. So all we need to do is take our old assembly, push the home button right out just like that, and then we're going to transfer that home button to our new device. So our home button, and we're going to place it right on our new assembly, just like that. As you can see, it sticks, and now all we got to do is check it. Right here, looks good. Black on white. Nice. Alrighty. And then what I'm going to do is, if you look on, so what we need to do now is adhesive. So if you guys need to add any adhesive here, you can. I would say if you haven't, and you can see over here, we did a little bit of damage going into the tape. We pushed it back a little bit, but I think that's still fine. I think that's enough tape to actually hold it in place properly. And you can see over here, there's no damage. And what you'll see is there's no tape anywhere else. Even on the old assembly, there was no tape anywhere else, because these mid frames are going to be holding it in for the most part. And you got just a little reinforcement down here with a little bit of adhesive at the bottom. So you should be fine. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to just go ahead and close this up a little bit, put the camera right there. We're not going to close it all the way. We're just going to lay it back down, right? And then what we're going to do is we're going to power it on to test it. Alrighty. So that's a good sign. We have our Apple, and we're just going to give it a few seconds to charge up. Now, the only thing we won't be able to test properly until we put it completely back down is the home button, because the home button contact is actually on the board, so it needs to be touching all the way down in order to properly test. But what we can see is it's powered on. We slide, cancel. So our touch is working fine. Our switch, volume switch, again, we can't test really until we get into it. Our home button, we can't really test at the moment, but our sleep wake, we can test, works good. So sleep wake's working good, touch is working good. So we'll go ahead and power this back down. So we just hold the button, power it back off, and then we'll continue to close it on up. We want to make sure it doesn't move on us when we're closing it up. Alrighty, so we got the home button straight. Alrighty. So what you guys want to make sure of is when you're putting this in, you want to make sure you start at the top, because you have a little metal lip right at the top. And we want to make sure that that lip goes underneath. Otherwise, what will happen is you'll get it clicked in at the bottom, and the top you won't be able to put in. So you want to start from the top and work your way down. Same way you opened it is the same way you want to close it. So we'll go ahead and get that metal lip in, get it lined up. Again, we want to make sure our camera, both our cameras lined up and our home button is in its proper place. All right, so we just want to make sure that's all the way down. Again, this home button, you might want to put some adhesive on it so it doesn't fall out on you, because one of the most frustrating parts of this is to get it closed and then the home button's not in the proper position. That can be very frustrating. There we go. Alrighty. Make sure we don't damage our, I don't want to put too much flex. We don't want to run the risk of damaging our LCD. Want to make sure everything is seated properly. And there we have it. Do. Test it out. Just power it on. Home button is a little crooked, but she'll be okay. So now we're just going to power it on, test it. I can see visually that my camera is lined up properly. So we're just going to test the functionality. Don't know the passwords, but we're just testing the numbers. Make sure every number is working appropriately, which looks like it is the case. Make sure our sleep wake button's working, home button is working. So at this point, everything seems to be okay. All right. And there you have it, guys. A full disassembly, reassembly of an iPod Touch 5th Gen. We replaced a bad screen and put in a new screen. So we removed the old screen, which is this one, put in a new screen, which was this one. So there you have it. Your iPod Touch 5th generation screen replacement. All right, this is William Agnew, Cellular Repair School. I'll see you guys in the next training.